Well, thanks for joining us here on Agri-Pulse.com. I'm Spencer Chase, and we're joined today by Sara Wyant, the editor and publisher of Agri-Pulse, as well as Brett Sciotto, the CEO of Aimpoint Research. And we're here today to talk a little bit about some of the research that Aimpoint has done in collaboration with Agri-Pulse to look at really a number of things, including the presidential election, as well as what farmers and ranchers see as some of the big issues in front of them, whether they're stepping into the ballot box or conducting business on their operations. And so we're really pleased to be joined today by both Brett and Sara as they look and kind of offer their own unique expertise. Obviously Sara from the subject matter of being Agri-Pulse's publisher and a longtime farm journalist, and Brett in terms of being an expert in terms of some of the things and some of the data that Aimpoint collects. And so really one of the first things that we want to do is have Sara just talk about, why is it that Agri-Pulse and Aimpoint decided to collaborate and do this research?
Well, thank you, Spencer. It's a pleasure to be with both you and Brett today to share the findings that we have uncovered with our partnership with Aimpoint. For the last 4 years, we have been able to work together to collect information about what farmers and ranchers are thinking about their president, their secretary of agriculture, and key issues across the country as they get ready for a 2020 and what promises to be another challenging year in farm country. As far as I know, Spencer, we're the only ag media company that invests in doing telephonic research to ranchers and farmers nationwide. And we go after this target audience in a way that enables us to actually have people out talking to producers and capturing their sentiments in a way that then we can share with our broader audience who will be making a lot of very impactful decisions about their future. We have a target audience in this survey of growers with at least $50,000 in gross farm income. And that's important to us because we want to try to target those producers who have some sort of skin in the game in terms of farm programs. And so we have a little bit larger income level than some, but we're able to document this actual audience, unlike internet surveys. This survey was conducted between February 19th and March 13th. At the time, we thought it would be a really good time because producers were not out in the field for the most part. Some southern growers were already planting, but for the most part, people were still getting ready for Plant 20. But of course, we could not have foreseen how this global pandemic would have panned out worldwide. And certainly as a result of that and the uptick in cases in the United States, the continuing spread, we're in an unprecedented time. And shortly after these survey questions were fielded, we were starting to see decisions to shut down social gathering, to have more people shelter in place. And as a result, by the time that we were able to report our findings last week in our weekly newsletter, we've seen a totally almost different world than what we were seeing when some of these questions were first fielded. But having said that, it's always difficult to figure out what is the perfect time to do research because there are a lot of other factors that can interact with our findings. But we feel very, very good that we've been able to partner with Aimpoint because they also work with a lot of other farm organizations and agribusinesses. And so their continuum of research adds additional credibility to what we were able to find from this most recent survey.
Right, and Sara, you mentioned a lot about the collaboration between Agri-Pulse and Aimpoint, and Brad, I'll kind of pivot to you here because we're hosting this video on Agri-Pulse.com, so if folks are watching it, they have some at least somewhat of a passing familiarity with Agri-Pulse and the work that we do. What can you tell our viewers and our listeners about Aimpoint, some of the work that Aimpoint does, and how they use that to kind of inform opinions around agriculture?
Sure. First of all, thank you to Spencer and Sara for the opportunity to be here with all of you. We certainly value the partnership that we've had for many years now with Agri-Pulse and always appreciate the chance to collaborate and chat with you all. Aimpoint is a company I founded after the military. We're a strategic intelligence firm. We serve leaders throughout the agri-food value chain. We spend most of our days collecting information and intelligence, some through primary market research in a number of different sources. We fuse that information together to help our clients have better context, a better actionable ability to kind of take in data and move it into strategies and tactics in their organization. So we spend our time thinking about the full context of the agri-food value chain and serving clients throughout the industry, from farm credit to the input providers to the distribution to the major advocacy groups that serve our farmers and ranchers across the nation. So Aimpoint is fielding surveys like what we did for Agri-Pulse on a daily basis. We're asking farmers their opinions on lots of different topics, from what are they going to plant this year to what chemicals are they going to use to how they feel about the president or certain issues confronting them. So it gives us an interesting broad view of how farmers and ranchers' opinions are changing, and certainly how they're thinking about the current environment and what their future looks like.
And Brett, if you can just give us kind of a research 101 question, what's and Sara touched on this a little bit, but can you just kind of give us a broad overview from the perspective of a researcher like yourself, the difference between the telephonic surveys and more of a web-based or a mailer platform? Really, when we're looking at those telephone-specific answers, what does that do in terms of the data that you're able to collect and the reliability of it?
Well, for us, it's very important to have a statistically valid sample of farmers and ranchers that we can confidently project onto their opinions across the entire universe. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that we have the right mix of farmers and ranchers that represent different regions, different age groups, different scales. The best way we've found to do that is telephonic. Certainly, we do a lot of online surveying too. There are plenty of other tactics that we can use, but when you really want statistical validity and you want to make sure that you're hearing from a broad section of farmers and ranchers, not just the ones that are most tech savvy, not just the ones that maybe are younger or more connected, but really to get a true representation of the entire farmer rancher universe, then we opt to go to the old-fashioned telephone survey, which allows us to control the folks that we have on the phone and the folks that we survey, so that we can make sure that we have that cross section. We find that that's the most valid way, especially when you're talking about opinions on things like presidential politics. So that was the approach we took in this particular case. And what we did is we know that Republicans predominantly tend to lean Republican. And so what we've done nationally is we've taken a sample and we've said, in order to have the statistical validity that we want, we need 600 total interviews. But we interviewed the first 550 roughly, and then we paused and we looked at the demographic breakdowns across that. We looked at the partisan breakdowns because it was a true representative sample at that point. And then what we did is oversampled Democrats too, to make sure that we had a statistically accurate subset. Now, we analyzed the data in two separate sets and then combined it where it made sense to understand Democrat preferences. But what we know is that across the nation, somewhere between 13 and 16% of farmers and ranchers identify themselves as Democrats. We wanted to make sure that we had a statistically valid sample of them as well. And so we kind of went this extra step to make sure that we heard their voice loud and clear in a representative way, but didn't in any way impact the true validity of the results on all the other topics that we might have discussed.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about some of the results that we saw, Sara, and look at really the kind of the headline number that we looked at in terms of some of the coverage that we've already done at Agri-Pulse, and that one being that 72% of the farmers and ranchers that we surveyed said they were willing to support President Donald Trump in his reelection efforts. And that's something that kind of got some folks' attention because, we've covered this. A lot of other outlets have as well. The farm economy has not been in good shape the last couple of years. These trade wars have certainly taken their toll on production agriculture and a number of individual outcomes. So I guess, Sara, if I can just ask you, as someone that's been covering farm policy for a number of years, what was your initial reaction when you saw that 72% number, which by the way has been growing over the course of some of these Aimpoint surveys that Agri-Pulse and Aimpoint have done?
Absolutely, Spencer. And one of the things that Brett pointed out is that farmers do tend to skew Republicans. And that's something that we've witnessed in our previous research. But we also know that there's been a lot of angst out there Net farm income's been net down. It's projected up a little bit, but there's uncertainty over the trade war with China, over a lot of uncertainty where we're going to get the new USMCA done. And then, of course, looking at what's happened in some of these key markets, trying to decide whether or not people should be planting corn in light of, the ethanol market being very uncertain. And anecdotally, we've heard from several producers who've said, boy, we're really upset with some of the decisions, especially on ethanol, that the Trump administration has made over the last several months. But now, as we look at this research, what we're seeing is with that 72% level, that's even higher than our previous survey. And as you know, when you drive around farm country, you still see a lot of people saying, we're going to stick with this president. So it was amazing to me that it was as high as it was, and it had grown since our previous research, but not totally a surprise when you think about the fact that they are looking at what their options are right now. And I think one of the messages for Democrats out of this is that, especially as they look at the issues that are of most concern to farmers and ranchers, this is an opportunity for Joe Biden, if he does end up, as we all expect, to be the Democratic nominee, to talk to rural farmers and ranchers about some of the same topics that the president has been so successful in doing. So it also points out openings for the Democrats as well, I think, to reach out to this audience.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Sara, you said something there that I want to kind of touch on a little bit, because you talked about being, almost a little bit surprised that we saw the level of support that we saw, but really, is it that horribly surprising? Because we know that farmers skew Republican. You and I have both been in the room the last couple of years at the American Farm Bureau convention when President Trump received a very warm welcome from a decidedly partisan audience that was very happy to see him. Should we be that surprised that farmers are this enthusiastic and this emphatic about their support for the president?
No, well, as I said, I don't think we can be totally surprised by this, but at the same time, if we hadn't had market facilitation program payments in 2018 and 19, an expectation that we'll see them again in 2020, I think you'd have a lot different answer than probably what we saw in this. So there's been a lot of intervention in those markets to shore up farmers, and I think that's been very, very key. And if you didn't have that, maybe a much more dour outlook. You still did see in our research, Spencer, that about 2/3 of the producers had some concerns about their ability to repay loans. So it's not like they're sitting in a sweet spot right now supporting this president. If anything, they've been able to make things do, and they're optimistic that he will continue to stand up for them and to reach out to them and to talk to them.
Well, and as we looked at some of the specific issues, not necessarily the candidates, but the issues that farmers care about when they step into a voting booth, one of the things that really rang true was finding those export markets for U.S. ag goods has consistently been among the top issues for farmers and ranchers. And, say what you want, how many times have we heard politicians say what you want about the president's trade strategy? He has gotten some deals out of it. And so now, as we look between now and November, this could be, potentially a turning point and a swinging point for the administration in terms of, whether or not these deals come to fruition, and whether or not they start to kind of shape the hearts and minds of voters in farm country as well.
Yeah, I agree with Sara's assessment. When you think about what these farmers and ranchers have been through for years now, it's been a prolonged period of turbulence, certainly a difficult period. Not surprising that 2/3 of them are concerned about their ability to make ends meet, their ability to keep operating and keep growing and achieve their goals. But they have stuck with this president. They have been resilient, and in many ways, he's done for them what he said he would do. He went out and said, we're going to renegotiate these agreements. We can all debate the merits of starting multiple trade conflicts all at once, but he did it, and he's appeared to have settled them. USMCA certainly ratified. We'll see how China delivers on phase one. But these farmers and ranchers, for an extended period of time, in all of our research, have been concerned about market access, have been interested in having these agreements more balanced, more fair, I think, to the American farmer. And he went out and got that done. And all along, he provided these MFP payments to support them in one of the worst years that any of us can probably recall, with 20 million acres of prevent plant and a lot of other factors. And so if you're a farmer and rancher, you've been through a tough time, you've tried to remain optimistic, you've had a president that appears to have fought for you, and then you get to this really unique option on the other side of the aisle, right? At the end of the day, they're looking at what alternative parties might bring in terms of a candidate, and there's probably a lot less certainty about what that would mean to farm country over time for a majority. So we've seen the president's approval go up and down a little bit over time. I wasn't surprised with the 72%. The highest we've seen is about 79%. There was another poll that was done outside of Aimpoint that showed 81%. There have been dips, but largely, I think any politician would be happy with a 70+% approval from any audience. And to do that through what has been a protracted time of great challenge, it just shows you the resilience of the farmers and ranchers in this country.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the other things, and Brett brings up a good point, but one of the things that has been consistent through the research over the last few years with Aimpoint is that farmers are also very concerned about regulatory burdens. And the president has made a huge pledge to remove those burdens. You often hear farmers say, just let's get the government out of my way and let me do what I do best, and that is preserve our natural resources and grow an abundant food supply. And he has delivered on that promise hands over, and that's been a consistent question and answer throughout any of our research. Now, you could take exception to that and say, well, it only lasts until an MFP payment of getting the government out of the way. But still, there's been an overtone of just this understanding that let's have somebody who's very business savvy in the White House. And I think a lesson for a lot of people who are talking to farm country is that if they can talk in those terms, then they'll have a more receptive audience.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Brett, you touched on this a little bit in some of the things that you had to say, but I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on anything in particular that jumped out at you when you looked at the Agri-Pulse results that we saw in collaboration with Aimpoint versus some of the other work that Aimpoint has done in terms of, you mentioned that you've seen something as high as 79% for the president, but whether we're looking at the president, opinions of the president, or opinions of some of the issues that farmers and ranchers care about, anything in particular that really jumped out in terms of the Agri-Pulse numbers versus some of the other Aimpoint work?
Yeah, I think the Agri-Pulse survey validated in many ways things that we're seeing in lots of other surveys around confronting the issues that farmers and ranchers are confronting on a daily basis. Certainly financial pressure, pretty resounding chorus of folks out there that are concerned about their ability to make ends meet and make a profit. You have labor, which continues to be a pretty dominant issue for a lot of farmers and ranchers. Over a third that are concerned about their ability to find the labor they need to keep doing what they want to do. And then you have market access, which has been a paramount issue for a while. And, this president came in very strong against immigration and some of the kind of loose policies of the past. He tightened up some of that, certainly has taken some strong opinions and positions on that. But I think all told, the farmers and ranchers, notwithstanding those opinions, have stuck with him, believing that there can be a solution to some of these labor challenges. I think one of the big questions will be is as we move towards what is likely to be a global recession as a result of COVID, there will be significant unemployment in this country and beyond. And will that change that dynamic at all on farm labor? That's something we're watching pretty closely. But I think if I had a couple takeaways, it would be the importance of continuing to find new markets and opportunities for American farmers. They get that. They get the global aspects of agriculture and what they do. They're concerned about labor, and they're concerned about making their ends meet. And that is something that the entire agri-food value chain needs to think about as we try to work our way through this short term, the pandemic, in the long term, making sure that we have the food security we need here in our country and abroad.
Hmm. And looking at, you mentioned things that you're watching in terms of the impact of COVID on the food supply, things like that. Is there anything that you're going to be watching especially closely between now and election day in terms of, what farmers are thinking politically, what they're thinking about the president, what they're thinking about Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee at this point? Anything in particular you're watching between now and a certain Tuesday in November?
Well, there's going to be a lot more disruption across the agri-food value chain over time, but I keep reminding everyone, these farmers and ranchers have already been through an extended recession, an extended period of difficulty, and they have shown resilience in sticking with this president. And so I don't believe, at this point at least, that there'll be anything that will really dramatically shake that confidence that they have in him. Nor do I believe that those numbers will decline between now and November. But a lot can happen, and we're definitely in uncharted territory at this point with the way our government and governments around the world are having to intervene to protect the people, to protect life. But in the process of doing that, significant disruptions economically, which will continue to put more pressure on farmers and ranchers. How we respond as a government, I think this president has made it clear that agriculture is a critical industry, that he'll put the money where it needs to be. If we're willing to infuse trillions of dollars into our economy to make ends meet, my guess is that farmers will be taken care of during that period of time. So I don't expect any disruption to the president's support from farmers and ranchers between now and the election. Certainly issues Joe Biden can bring to light, certainly topics that are concerning to farmers, but will he have the credibility? Will he have the history to be able to offer something that they have confidence and trust in to make a move in terms of their voting support? I think we'll see. My bet is that their confidence stays with the current president, and that follows him all the way through to November.
Mm-hmm. So obviously a lot of things for us to follow politically speaking from these results and from some of the other various things that we have to take a look at, including something we're going to be detailing in an upcoming issue of our Agri-Pulse newsletter on Wednesday. As a matter of fact, looking at some of the climate and sustainability dialogue that we saw and some of the results that we saw. And Sara, I'll just throw this to you. I mean, some interesting changes in terms of what we've seen. Whether you want to call it climate change, sustainability, no matter what the terminology might be, so some interesting changes in this particular survey versus some of the other data that we've seen in the past.
Yes, Spencer, and just so everybody understands, the research is very comprehensive, and we reported on just part of it in last Wednesday's newsletter, and everybody can find that full report on our website, agripulse.com. The second part will be in this next week's newsletter coming out this Wednesday, and that will talk more about some of the other issues that are of top concern. One of the things that we've found, and when we've asked people to list their top issues, is that the topic of addressing climate change is almost always near the bottom. It is increased a little bit of concern from what we've seen in the most previous survey, but it's still at the bottom. However, when you look at some questions that we ask in terms of sustainability, there was a very robust interest in doing things to address conservation of natural resources. And I think as we continue to explore this, it's interesting that farmers, if you talk to them about topics in a certain way, can respond differently. Again, I'm not really surprised by that because most of the farmers and ranchers I know really do want to do what's best for the environment because that's where they live and they work. But at the same time, there's a lot of good things that they're trying to do to be more sustainable. And we uncovered some of those different practices in this next piece of research that we'll be writing about.
Mm-hmm. So certainly it's another example of, the way the conversation might be framed is, indicative of the way the information is received and the way farmers and ranchers are willing to act upon it. So obviously, another interesting story coming in this week's Agri-Pulse newsletter based on some Agri-Pulse and Aimpoint research. But I guess before I let you both go, any parting thoughts in terms of this research and what we should be watching for here in the next couple months? And Sara, I'll start with you on that.
So I think the overall research package is important, not just for the presidential race, but looking at down ballot races as well. When you try to understand what are the key issues for farmers and ranchers, you can see that even in some of these swing districts, it would be important to perhaps understand what farmers are reacting to and not reacting to, and the way that you address them, the terminology that can be used can be very important for candidates at all levels. Because even though we know that farmers and ranchers are a relatively small portion of the U.S. population, in many swing districts and in many of these races, where even as you look at the presidential, it was important because they turn out and they do vote, and they can make a difference as we look at the overall election at almost every level.
Mm-hmm. Brett, parting thoughts on the research and what you think might be the implications of it?
I'll just maybe putting it into context as you think about what we're dealing with now. Everybody quarantined, on occasion you see those empty shelves at the grocery store. I think food security becomes more and more a topic of discussion. And we can see just in our daily lives, just even the perception of food insecurity can cause some real disruptions in our civil society. It's a fragile balance, keeping a population calm through something like what we're experiencing now, and food security is going to be paramount to that. So I actually think that farmers and ranchers will become more of a topic of discussion over time, and certainly the greater macro issue of U.S. food security and global food security will become more of a topic of conversation through the presidential election. I think that will probably benefit farmers and ranchers from that conversation. I think it will only reinforce this president's support of them. But I do think it'll bring new issues to light, new opportunity for conversation for the industry to have about the important role that it plays in our society and beyond. So I do see food security becoming more of a topic over time.
So obviously some interesting things to follow there as we continue to follow the results of the Agri-Pulse Aimpoint research, as well as the implications of it and what that might mean for, as Sara mentioned, some down ballot races, as Brett mentioned, some future potential COVID-19 impacts, as well as the broader food security debate. So plenty for us to follow here at Agri-Pulse. Sara, Brett, we appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Always a privilege. Thank you.
Thanks.